Champaign County Agriculture Today with your host, Dennis Riggs.
Hello and welcome to Champaign County Agriculture Today. My name is Dennis Riggs, your host for the program. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope that this next few minutes that you spend with us will be an enlightening one as we talk about the importance of agriculture here in Champaign County. You know, when we think about agriculture, we think about the soils, we think about the crops growing out there, but you know, all that does not happen automatically. Our farmer friends in the country use various forms of tillage and farming practices to raise the crops that we enjoy as food and fiber each and every day. So today we have a great list of guests that's going to talk to us about the tillage practices, the whys, the why nots, the different equipment, and we'll be talking with them today. And I'll introduce those gentlemen to you all today. First of all, we have Howard Brown, who is the manager of agronomy services with Growmark in Bloomington. Howard, welcome to our program. Tell me about your job, what you do with Growmark.
Well, I'm manager of agronomy services. I'm kind of, if you want to think of it simplistically, in charge of the techies in our building, and we're responsible for technical information collection and getting it out to the people in the field. So we'll talk about what insects are a problem, what weeds are a problem, what are we doing with fertility, and I work with Illinois, Iowa, and Wisconsin on those topics.
Very good. So a broad background. See a lot of farmers each and every day. Next with us today is Dave Long. Dave is a tillage production specialist with Case IH, making his television debut today. Dave, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. What do you do on a daily basis with Case IH?
Well, it's good to be here. Thanks a lot. On a daily basis, I work with our dealer network and their customers, working with them and with our tillage equipment and helping them find solutions to problems they might have to help them with their production to maximize their yield and I work primarily in Illinois and in Missouri and in the eastern part of Iowa.
Dave, have you been around agriculture a lot, or is this a new field for you?
Oh, no, I've been around agriculture all my life. Grew up in a farm in northwest Missouri and spent several years in Missouri managed a grain elevator, retail fertilizer plant, and now have about 13 years in the farm equipment business. So.
Very good. Well, good to have you with us today.
Thank you.
Another gentleman's been around just about since tillage was invented. Wayne Coffin, manager of Berkey's here in Urbana and the area. Wayne, it's good to have you with us today. I know you've been in the farm equipment business for many years. Give us a little background where you're from and how long you've been doing what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you, Dennis. I've been in the business for 37 years. Started in 1970 with Berkey's Farm Store, who's a dealer here in Urbana. We're a Case IH dealer. And was raised on a farm up by Rantoul right here in Champaign County and still involved in farming some. But my main function, of course, is to manage the store here in Urbana and deal with the farmers on their tillage equipment needs and all of their farm equipment needs.
Now, Wayne, a lot of people don't realize that, you know, Berkey's is out there. They've probably driven by it on the east side of Urbana. What type of equipment do you handle? Is it everything, or what's the scope of the equipment that Berkey's handles?
Basically, on the agriculture side, it's everything they would need to put a crop in the ground and harvest that crop later on, from the tractors to the tillage equipment, planting equipment, the combine and harvesting equipment. It's the full line of agricultural equipment that they would need to produce a crop, as well as some other items, you know, for lawn and garden use as well.
There you go. If it grows or needs to be tilled, you guys can do it.
We can take care of them.
And tillage is what we're talking about today. Tillage is such an important part of agriculture. Without tilling the soil, whether it's the garden in your backyard or whether it's the 80 acres behind the tool shed, a very important part to raising crops. So, Howard, I'm going to start out with you. What's the academic version of what is tillage? How would you describe it?
Well, tillage is the mechanical disturbance of the soil or mixing of the soil in preparation to plant a seed and create an environment for root growth. I think that's as simple as I could put it.
Mm-hmm. Are there new techniques? Are there old techniques? How many techniques are there as far as coming to tillage?
Well, there's a lot of techniques. Back when we first broke ground at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we had what we call the moldboard plow, and we would major disruption of the soil, mixed it, Mixing the soil would provide us fertility, natural fertility, good aeration. But as we went on through time, we've realized there's other ways of tilling soils to preserve the natural resource and still get optimum production. So we've really come a long way, and we have a variety of ways that we could look at tillage, and really titles of different tillage practices farmers use in Illinois.
Well, Dave, you have a chance to work with tillage equipment. You know, Howard knows about the soils. You know about the equipment side of it. When I'm talking about a piece of tillage equipment, what does that equipment have to do? And I think we've got a slide number 17 that we're going to pull up here in just a second, but that's going to show a piece of equipment. How do you describe tillage equipment?
Well, when farmers want to employ a piece of tillage equipment, you know, they're really, you know, wanting to manage risk. You know, to give them the best opportunity to give that crop the right environment, to have excellent root growth and crop health. So there's some fundamental things that they look at and consider when they're considering a piece of tillage equipment, and those, you know, primarily would be crop residue management, soil tilth, and then seedbed conditions are going to be, you know, three of your primary drivers to which pieces of tillage equipment they may want to use on farms.
Howard, I'm going to jump back to you for just a second, because there's two major areas of tillage we talk about. One is conventional tillage. Let's talk about that. Give me a definition.
Okay, conventional tillage, and that you'll have as many definitions as we do people in this room, but conventional tillage is a primary disruption of the soil, moldboard plow, a real big heavy-duty chisel plow, but a major turning. And as a result of that, we have secondary tillage passes. So you've got one primary and two or more secondary. In other words, a field cultivator or...
We've got a picture here,
Sure.
Slide number 5. Let's bring that up and talk about conventional tillage. You've got the primary and the secondary. Right there it is.
Sure. And as you can see, the secondary tillage, normally it's two or more passes, so they're making a good seed bed, good seed-to-soil contact, and that pretty much is what I call conventional.
Okay, then let's roll right over into our next slide, which is conservation tillage. How does that differ from the conventional?
Okay. Now, conservation tillage we've defined as when you finish your tillage passes, you have 30% or more of the surface covered with residue. And the purpose of that is that with that percentage of residue, we feel we've minimized the likelihood of soil moving off of that area in places where we don't want it to go. So conservation tillage is using implements that minimizes surface disturbance so that we can keep the residue.
Okay, I'm going to go back to slide 17 for just a second, because that is probably one of the most important minimum till piece of equipment we've got, and that is of a disc chisel. So Wayne, I'm going to ask you, we've got a picture of a disc chisel up here. Explain what that piece of equipment is doing in the field right there.
And that's a primary piece of tillage equipment used in the fall. It's pictured there in corn stalks after the corn's been harvested. Basically, the machine has discs on the front to cut and size the residue. Then there's deep tillage shanks that come along behind that and rip the soil to try and get better water penetration and break up the compaction layers that are down there. And typically they'll have a leveling device on the back to try to reduce the size of the clods in the dirt.
Now, is that piece of equipment there, has that been around for years, or is that a relatively new piece of equipment?
Well, it's been around quite a few years, been a lot of different configurations, but it's much more popular today than it was 25 to 30 years ago. When I first started the business, it was moldboard plows, and the moldboard plow is almost extinct in our area. You'll see them run a plow once in a while, but this is probably the main tool that's used.
That's good old conventional tillage.
Yes.
Well, Howard, let's talk about the other one that is discussed a lot nowadays, and that's no-till. We have slide number 7 that's going to talk a little bit about that and give us a picture. When you say no-till, does that mean? I had a farmer ask me once, how many times can I go across the ground and still be no-till?
Well, Dennis, I had a farmer tell me one time, I asked him what practice he was using. He says no-till, and I said, well, how are you no-tilling? He says, well, I'm taking my no-till drill out there that has a row of discs across the front of it. I'm running it across the field, and the second time I'm putting in seed. So, you know, tillage, no-till is depending upon the individual, but the true definition of no-till is the only disturbance of that soil will be the planter slot where it cuts a place to put the seed. Now that's true no-till. So all the other practices are done without disturbance. And in southern Illinois, I think there's frankly a fair share of the soils down there are managed with using true no-till.
Dave, when you take a look at the different equipment that's out there, and you see no-till, you've seen pictures here of conventional tillage. Does it make a difference? Is it truly a different piece of equipment that you need to do these different type of planting practices?
Typically, to set up the planter, if you're going to follow conventional tillage or no-till, the operators will make some different adjustments to their planter in respect to down pressure, or adding some other attachments. In a no-till situation, they'll probably want to have some residue cleaners on there to move some of the residue away right in front of the planter opener, which they may not use in a conventional tillage operation.
Now, when we talk residue, sometimes, like when you take a shower over on the left-hand corner, there's a little bit of residue left there.
Mm-hmm.
When we're talking out in the field in agriculture, what is the definition of residue?
Residue is the plant material that's left over from the previous crop. That when the combine goes through the crop in the fall and spreads the chaff and the remaining bits of the plant material out across the soil, that's the residue that's left from that previous crop.
Okay, we've talked about conventional till, we've talked about no-till, and it's just like in life, it's not black and white. We have one other one to talk about, and that's called strip till.
Yes.
It's kind of a combination. Howard, tell us about strip tillage. Is it a combination, or is it neither one of the two?
Strip tillage kind of evolved from no-till, because everybody was using the phrase no-till, but there was a little bit of tillage involved. So strip till is actually the definition of where a producer will go out and apply a fertilizer, specifically anhydrous ammonia or sometimes phosphorus potassium. They knife it in, and then in the following spring they come back and plant into that same area. Now, they don't disturb the rest of the soil, so it's kind of a version of no-till, but it's in a micro environment right where that seed's planted. They've got primary and secondary tillage.
The best of both worlds.
The best of both worlds.
We're going to go to slide number 23, and because that's kind of an interesting picture, and we like to bring folks along as we head out in the field oftentimes. And the slide that we're going to put up next is a strip till environment. Okay, explain what's going on here in this slide.
Okay, as you can see, this is a standard anhydrous ammonia applicator pulling a tank through the field. But notice on the side, you see this arm extended out there. And that arm is extended so that when the farmer turns around at the end, he knows exactly where he needs to go back through the field, because he wants to be able to plant right on top of those tracks. And with RTK, or with the tools we now have with precision agriculture, we can actually use georeference technology. The farmer can actually tell the planter to stay right on top and take his hands off the wheel, and he can actually guide it through the field and putting it right in the right place.
We zoomed in a little bit closer here in our next slide, and we're actually seeing that strip of tillage that went on. This probably shows the best of anything I've seen for a while of what strip till actually looks like.
Yes, and normally quite doesn't look that good, because this is the fall of the year, and when we come around to the spring of the year, Mother Nature has kind of melted it back down and the residue covers it up. But that's an example of what strip till would be.
Very good. Well, it's interesting. A little bit of a combination there, taking the best of both worlds and makes it worthwhile. Well, sometimes some soils aren't able to do this. Sometimes soils feel, and some experts say they need to be tilled up a little bit deeper. And Wayne, I'm going to bring up a picture here in just a second of a ripper. I believe it's slide number 22, and we're going to bring that up here in just a second. Do we have farmers in Champaign County that do combinations of this type of tillage, no-till, strip till, conventional till, or do guys specialize in one or the other? And here's a picture of that ripper. Tell us what this piece of equipment does first.
This piece is typically used just to go in and not disturb the soil very much, just to go down and break up the compaction layer. And at about normally 10, 12 inches is where they'll find that compaction layer, and to break that up so you get better water penetration and root penetration. But we do have farmers doing a combination. Some are doing some strip till. They're getting into that more now. And they still do some conventional and some no-till. So, I mean, it's all over the board, but what works for one doesn't necessarily work for the other.
Next thing up, we've talked about conventional till, and we haven't really looked at equipment too much there. Dave, I'm going to go to slide number 21, and what we're going to look at there is a conventional field cultivator with a crumbler on the back. Tell us how many farmers are using this piece of equipment here, and what it actually does to the soil.
Okay, the field cultivator is the most popular tool that the farmers are using today as their secondary tillage tool. Now, that tool that they're going to go in right before planting in the springtime to prepare those seed beds, to prepare their soils, to follow up with their planter and place their seeds. And what they're doing with the field cultivator is one, again, they need to manage the residue, get it uniformly through the tool. But the primary operation is to level those fields and prepare a uniform, consistent seed bed. One, gives a nice smooth place for that planter to run, but also, down at the seed planting depth, give a nice flat level floor that's uniform in temperature and moisture, so that all those seeds, when we place them, can germinate at the same time.
Dave, what would you say the average depth that farmers plant a seed in their field?
They like to plant it down into moisture, and that can vary a little bit with the spring. This spring we're blessed with plenty of moisture, but a lot of times they're going to be down in the 2-inch range.
Now, is there a possibility of planting too deep? Can a seed be planted too deep where it would not grow?
There would be times where you could get it planted too deep. You have the risk of a hard rain coming afterwards and getting a crust over the surface of the soil. So
it can be messed up. You can mess up the planting situation. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
Okay, Wayne, what are you seeing as far as farmers when they are choosing a tillage operation for their farm? What do they weigh? What factors enter into that?
Well, some of it's their soil type and the degree of slope on their land. If they have highly erodible soils, this type of conventional tillage is not for them, and they're going to be using some no-till equipment on that type of soils. But the soils vary so much in erodibility and so forth that it just depends on where they're at in their location and what type of soil they have. Most of the ground that we have in this part of our country and our trade area is being chisel plowed. A lot of it is using the chisel plow in the fall and conventional tillage to prepare the seed bed in the spring. That's the highest percentage of what we have.
Mm-hmm. Well, with all the different tillages possibilities that are out there, I'm going to come back to Howard. You get to work with farmers in a multi-state area. What are the pros? What are the good things for a farmer to consider when choosing to do tillage?
Well, tillage is definitely a way to go for corn production, soybean production. When you think of tilling the soil, the first thing you do in the spring of the year, like right now, we loosen it up, we air it out, we let it warm faster, so a warm soil is much better than a cold soil to put the seed into. Moisture relations. So over the course of the winter, the soil becomes a little tight. If you go out in your garden or your yard, it's pretty firm this time of year. When you run that tiller over the first time, it loosens it up, it makes you feel good. Well, tillage does the same thing, only what it does, it gives good soil aeration. So we have to give air to the roots, because roots breathe just like we do, only me not as much, but they have to have air. And then when you look at tillage, residue. Residue is good for control of erosion, but when we have our level soils with less than 3 or 4% slope, that there's not a lot of slope, we don't have erosion problems. It's good probably to get rid of that residue, put it back into the soil and let the soil make organic matter out of it. That way we don't have things to harbor insects and diseases. And then the list goes on, because you warm the soil up, the microbes break down, they give you nutrients. We also are able to work in our fertilizers, your limestone. Limestone is pulverized rock, so you got to work it in. Earthworms won't backpack it down very far. And when we look at the herbicides to control weeds, sometimes we have to incorporate those. So it's a very long list of pros as far as the use of tillage.
How akin is this to people in town that have gardens? They're going to be growing tomatoes, sweet peas. They're not maybe growing, corn and soybeans in that type of environment. Are those same tillage practices good for their garden?
Okay, when you think of tillage, and when I think of tillage, we always get this phrase, oh, my field is just like a garden. And the reason for that, it just feels good. And when we go out into a garden, we can really do some macho things, because we don't have a very big space, and I can leave that tiller there for 5 minutes and end up burying it. And the value of that is the depth of that tillage loosens the soil. Generally, that allows my root systems more room for exploration. So if I have loose soils, the roots spend less energy in pushing and more energy in growing. And that's the same kind of philosophy that we have with farmers' fields. So to get back to your question, loose soils generally will lead to a larger root mass early in the growing season.
Okay, so with that in mind, I'm going to turn to Dave and say, Dave, what pieces of equipment then are farmers looking at to do what Howard says is to make that soil tilthy, feel good? What are the pieces of equipment he would consider, or she?
That to improve the soil tilth and get that soil environment where you have approximately 50% mineral, 25% air, 25% water. A lot of that is done in the fall with those primary tillage tools. You're also managing residue, cutting and sizing and mixing some residue, but with our combo primary tillage rippers in the fall, with the shanks on those rippers, go down in the soil profile, 12, 13 inches deep, down below where typically we might have some compacted soil, and lift and fracture that soil, get that pore space in there to improve that soil tilth.
When I work on my little garden patch, and I don't have much there at my place, I get my father-in-law's tiller out, and it's got that really nice 5 horsepower Briggs & Stratton engine on there. Now, Wayne, for the tillage operations we're talking about here, I'm guessing 5 horsepower isn't quite enough. What type of horsepower do we see that farmers need to pull this tillage equipment through their fields?
It's high horsepower equipment. In most cases, these tools are in the fall on the primary tillage. We're looking at 300 to 500 horsepower tractors on most of those tillage equipment. And on the larger field cultivators and primary tillage, seedbed preparation, it's the same thing. And it depends on the size. There are some smaller units that could use less horsepower, but typically it's 300 to 500 horsepower units, four-wheel drive units, and front-wheel assist machines to pull these across the field at the proper speed to make a good seed bed.
Very good. All right, so there's the pros of tillage and kind of what it takes to get it done. Now let's shift gears. Howard, I know that we're looking at other types of way to graze crops, and one of them is that tillage is not a good thing, or to reduce it is a good thing. What is the disadvantage of tillage?
Okay, and when we think of the difference between till and not to till, I think we look at also slope and topography of the land. And where we have a lot more slope, or the land is more it's more easy to erode that, then reducing tillage is an advantage. So but the cons of the cons of tillage would be soil erosion, because we lose it with water runoff and maybe wind. Also with tillage, when we're short of moisture, it tends to dry the soil out. So we could end up drying the soil out before we get our seed planted, making it either planting deeper or waiting for a rain in order to plant the crop. Also, tillage destroys soil structure. If we were to talk about soils and different soils types in Illinois, we would talk about structure. And when you look at a soil, there's a profile where the soil looks different as you go down. And generally under soils that have been tilled, we have what we call the AP horizon, the surface 12 inches. And why do we call it AP? Because it's the surface, A, P, plow. So it's the surface that's been plowed, no structure, because we've destroyed that. With adoption of no-till in these sloping soils, over time we start to see the soil starting to form aggregates or different structures in the soil that allows water to infiltrate down at a faster rate, aiding drainage in those fields. So there's a lot of advantages to maintaining good soil structure. And then finally, it was mentioned earlier that if we do a lot of tillage, we end up making very fine soil particles. Every time we hit that soil with a tillage pass, we make the soil particles finer. And when it rains, the fines float, and when the water leaves, the fines are the last to settle all together, making a crust.
See. Well, Dave, if tillage has its advantages, but then this no-till on the reduced and strip till has advantages. What types of equipment is Case IH offering to the farmer that will allow them to do less tillage?
That's why we offer several different types and pieces of equipment, so that farmer can manage to his situation, how he would want to, how much residue he may or may not want to leave on the surface of the soil. We have our combo primary tillage rippers, which will turn over quite a bit of residue and leave the soil fairly black on top. We also have our minimum tillage rippers, which primarily just uses a straight coulter to cut the residue, uses the ripper shanks to lift and fracture the soil to increase the amount of pore space and improve the soil tilth, but leaving the surface of the soil, relatively undisturbed, so that residue is still there in place to hold the soil in place and to fight off the negative effects of wind and water erosion. And one of the other things that we have been involved in is strip till, and strip till is one of those practices that really gives you the benefits of conventional tillage. What the seed sees and the young crop sees as tillage, but you get the benefits of no-till in between the rows and more residue left there to slow down that water and slow down that wind.
Doesn't it usually take, Dave, a separate piece of equipment that's made for conventional farming is not necessarily, you can't put an adapter on it or change it to make it into no-till or reduced tillage equipment?
There are specific pieces of equipment for more no-till type operations. There are with the options and attachments you choose, there are some pieces of primary tillage equipment that in one instant with a certain set of features and options on it could be used in a minimum tillage type situation, with a different set of attachments and options could be used in a more conventional tillage operation. So there is some flexibility there. Again, tillage is a management tool for the farmer, and he needs to know and understand his factors out there in his fields, his soil types, his slopes, whether he tends to have wetter soils or drier soils, and he can manage what he uses and where he uses it.
Well, this is a lot of change that's happening, and Wayne, I know you've been in the business for quite a while. Are farmers concerned about their tillage? Are they looking at tillage as a way to take better care of their farms? Is that part of it?
Yes, they are. It's a management tool for them, and they're very concerned about managing the soil and taking care of that soil. So there's a lot of concern for picking the right tool to use and to take care and manage the residue and to increase yields. I mean, that's the ultimate goal, is to increase their yields and manage the soil. Have you actually seen farmers change their techniques of farming due to soil conservation? Yes, we have. There's been, like I say, it varies in different areas, but we have a number of no-tillers, and some are conventional, but it depends on the area. Okay. Well, we've covered a lot of ground here, if you will, gentlemen, as we've talked about tillage. We've talked about the different types of tillage. Howard, is there something new coming down the road in just a couple of seconds? Have we seen it all, or is there something new being developed?
Dennis, there is always something new being developed. Just stay tuned for our next session.
There you go. That's exactly what I want to hear. Well, and that's why I appreciate you gentlemen taking time out of your day to come and talk about tillage practices here in East Central Illinois. So thank you very much. And we'd like to thank you for listening in today, because with agriculture comes with it an understanding of where your food and your fiber comes from. And by listening to programs like this, we hope that you are in a partnership with agriculture to help us have a good environment for the future. So hope you'll tune in again next time when we're here at Champaign County Agriculture Today. I'm your host, Dennis Riggs.
Champaign County Agriculture Today is brought to you by Champaign County Farm Bureau.